as we embark on this journey for the next several weeks of looking at a million little miracles, I do want to encourage you. I'd invite you to the book that I read called A Million Little Miracles about probably 6 months or so ago by a guy named Madison was very encouraging to my heart, because so many times I think we can get focused on the wrong things. We can get focused on all the things that tend to go wrong in our lives. That's kind of the norm, often probably the way we are. And maybe you found yourselves in those moments where you get focused on the wrong thing or what's wrong with a situation. Maybe it's like one of those moments you get like one bad text message and kind of your whole day's just shot. Maybe it's one bill that came in that was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And it's like everything's going downhill. The budget's blown. It's never going to work out. And we just kind of go, maybe it's one situation that maybe a comment at work, and before you know it, work's terrible. It's the worst place I could ever be in my entire life. You know, we've had those moments probably in our life where we just struggle and we get focused on those wrong things. You know, a stress point comes in our life and it's like, man, it's over. This is done for. We're finished. And suddenly, that's all we can see in those moments. When we get focused on that one wrong thing, we miss out on so many of the other good things. And I've noticed even in my own life, so I can have 10 good things happen in one day. And one bad thing can happen, frustrating moment. That's what I say, by the way. If you're ever around me, Michelle will be like, are you upset or mad? I'm just frustrated. So if I ever tell you frustrated, it usually means it's about to get bad. So anyways, but it's those moments, it's like one frustrating moment can happen and it just wrecks everything. Has anybody ever experienced that before? Well, maybe that's not you. That's me. And I just tend to just have those moments where I get focused on that one thing and it kind of determines everything. Because I believe that what you focus on really shapes what you see. That what you focus on in your life, what you get dialed into, really shapes what you see and how you see it. And we all do this. We magnify the problems, the issues, the struggles. We can even minimize God in the midst of those moments. We overlook what's right in front of us sometimes. The things and the opportunities that are right in front of us. That one bad thing or that one problem can throw off everything. And if we're not careful, that one thing will dominate everything and it'll change it all. And this is the tension, I believe, for many of us. It's not that God isn't working, even in those moments. It's that we've often stopped noticing. That God is at work at every moment in our life. And often we want to see the big, the miraculous, this miracle. We want the earth to shake. But it's often in the smallest things. And over the next several weeks, we're going to look at this and see that it's often those small things that God's doing some of His greatest work, His greatest miracles around us. If we'll just stop and take notice. If we'll take notice of the moments in our lives. If we're not careful, we can overlook the miracles. Often because of familiarity of the mundane of life or the busyness that we get into. Anybody else busy? Schedule's packed, trying to figure out where you're going to fit anything else in. And sometimes we so pack our lives with things that we miss out on what God is doing. Growing up in Kentucky, one of my favorite things every night, and where we would look up and we would see the stars. And I love to figure out where the constellations were, where Orion was, the Big Dipper, and all these different things. And I remember it was only on the clearest nights you could see those. But it was interesting when we went out to the country, where a lot of my family had grown up in. We would go out to the country, and it was amazing at night. You'd look up, and it looked like you could see every star in the galaxy. Because when we get in the city, a lot of times we have light pollution that ends up almost making it look like the stars disappear. And the stars, the thing was, the stars don't disappear. We just have too much getting in the way of seeing them. And I wonder if the same thing is often true in our spiritual lives. That we allow so many things to clutter up and get into the busyness of our lives that we miss out, or we miss what God is doing in the midst of our lives. Of how he's surprisingly moving even in the smallest areas of our lives. Even in those areas where we wonder, like even in this moment as you've sat here, and I bet probably for most of us, we haven't even thought about breathing. But we've breathed over and over and over again without a thought. That you've blinked your eyes and haven't even realized how many hundreds and thousands of times you will blink your eyes today. The fact that we're moving at a rate of speed, but yet set at a perfect axis in an orbit that we move, and yet we're not thrown off the globe, is an amazing miracle of God. And that is the power and the majesty of who God is, that even in the smallest mundane ways, we often miss out some of His greatest works. And if you got a Bible, I want to invite you to grab it out. And over the next several weeks, we may even get a little nerdy sometimes. If you're an engineer, you may go, well, yeah, Josh, I already knew some of these things you're going to talk about in the next several weeks, but that's okay. Let it just be a refresher course for you to go, wow, God really is good. And that's what I hope it will be for us. That we're reminded of how great God is and how good He really is. In Genesis chapter 15, I want to encourage you to grab it out today. Grab your Bible. If you don't have one, there's some in the back. You can also get, if you got it on your phone or wherever it may be, I encourage you. Genesis chapter 15. And I just want to kind of set some things up of what's happening here. Abram is a pretty old guy. He's around 100 years old. Would we all agree that's pretty old? He has a wife that's equally about as old as he is, about 90 years old. And Abram, the one thing he's always wanted was an heir. He wanted a son that could carry on his name. But I don't know if you're aware, typically most 100-year-old people and most 90-year-old people, that typically doesn't work anymore. And he just wanted a son. That was his hope, his desire. And here's the thing we would know about, that you and I, we would, if you do a little investigation and reading back a little more, Abram is a blessed man. He's got a lot of stuff. He's got land, he's got property, he's got fortune, he's got blessings upon blessings. But the one thing he doesn't have is the one thing that he desires the most, and that's an heir. Because during that day and time, it was pretty important that your name would be passed on. That your name would continue on. That was a part of your legacy. That you would have things that you could pass on to the next generation. And here Abram finds himself in the midst of, in Genesis chapter 15, where he gets to this passage of Scripture we see, and he has all these blessings, all these great things in his life, things that you and I would probably die for, would love to have. It seems that he has everything. And yet he lacked what he felt like was one thing he wanted above everything else. And as God takes him out, he is there and has this moment with the Lord, he has a vision. And God comes to him and tells him, don't be afraid, for I'm going to protect you. And I will reward you greatly, is what he says. But this is not going to go on the screen, but I want you just to hear this from Abram in this moment in verse 2. So God just made a promise. I'm going to protect you. You don't have to be afraid. And I'm going to reward you. Your reward will be great. If we got that from God, I think that would be all we'd need. But Abram says this, but O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eleazar of Damascus, a servant of my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir. It's in this moment that Abram, in his frustration, I believe, and in the disappointment of what he thought his life would be like, he was thinking, because the way it worked is that, hey, whoever was the top servant of your household, they would be the one. If you died without an heir, they would get your wealth. They would get your heir, your legacy. And here Abram is, passive kind of aggressively. My God, what good is all this? But you haven't given me a son. And then God says this in verse 5. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up to the skies and count the stars if you can. I like how he put that there. That's how many descendants you will have. And it says that Abraham believed God and he was counted righteous by God. He told Abram, look up. Look up at the stars. This is how a powerful moment. Because Abram, who's discouraged, who's frustrated, who's waiting on God, and what does God do? He doesn't give him a strategy. He doesn't give him a plan. He gives him a new perspective. He gives him a perspective that would change everything. He tells him to step outside and look up. See, because for Abram, his problem in this moment wasn't just his situation. It was his view. He had been staring at his problem, and God invited him to see his promise. The promise that he had made Abram. That he would have more descendants of the stars. Even if he could count them all, he can't count them. I don't know if you've ever tried to count the stars before. There's more than I can count. And that's the beauty and the power and the splendor of who God is that for many of us, God's not inviting to give us a new strategy, but instead to change our perspective and be reminded of the promises that he's given us, the promises that he's made us. It's why the psalmist says in Psalm chapter 34, verse 3, he said, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together." And the tension for many of us is you can't make God bigger. He already is big. But your perspective of his greatness can become bigger. He is already bigger than big and gooder than good. He's stronger than strong, more than you could ever realize. And let us magnify who he is. And so I want you to know a few things as we walk through this series, as we're setting up today where we're heading. Is number one, I want to encourage you, you're going to magnify something every day. Every one of us will choose to magnify something. You can choose to magnify your problems, your fear. You magnify your comparison of who has what versus what you have. Because whatever you magnify will dominate your life. If it's always about your problems, those will be the things that get the most magnification. If it's always about the stress that you have, and it doesn't mean we don't lack stress. Because I don't know about you, there's days I got some stress. But whatever we magnify will determine your life. The second thing is, a low view of God shrinks your world. A low view of God shrinks your world. See, a low view of God results in a narrow framing of His power. We often say, well, God is omnipresent. God is omnipotent. He is all-knowing. He's all-powerful. But when we have a low view of God, which means really a small view of Him, it equals bigger problems. But when we have a bigger view of who God is, a greatness of who He really is, we have a proper perspective that He is far greater than even our biggest problem. Because here's the truth and the reality. When, in our perspective, God gets bigger, everything else gets smaller. It doesn't mean it all goes away. It would be nice. I've got some stress that I would like to disappear out of my life. I have some frustrations sometimes. There's even some people at times. You're probably more spiritual, and you don't have people that you would love to not be around all the time. But they're there. But the problem is, have you magnified them more than God? Have they gotten more of your attention than God? Have the problems, are we so focused on them that we miss out on the greatness of God? Or we allow God to get so big that all of a sudden those problems seem so small? Because wherever our eyes are, I believe, will determine our perspective. If they're always on our problems, we often will find ourselves in trouble. And the other thing I believe as well, too, I would encourage you with, is that the posture determines perspective. See, our willingness to see God's grandeur grows when we assume the proper posture. For Abraham, it was that moment when he had to look up. He had to leave the tent, to step outside and to look up. And that's a posture that many of us, I believe, in those moments where we find a struggle, in heartache, in fear, wherever it may be, we need to check our posture. And just so you can understand a little bit about kind of where Abram was, the tents that they had back then were often made out of goat hair. They were very rough and coarse, but they were good because they would not allow the light in. It's the reason many of us, we put up shades, we'll put up room darkening shades so that it gets darker and darker. That was one of my favorite things as a high school student. It was so I could get it really dark, so if I stayed up late, I could sleep as long as I could, because if the sun comes up, I got to be honest, I'm typically getting up. And it was the fact that these tents were made in a way that they were dark, they were enclosed. They would even often encircle the tents when they would gather an encampment of people to often act as a way of guard in those moments as well too. But here's what I know, is that for all of us, and for Abram even in this moment, you can't see the stars from inside the tent. See, I believe for the tent in this moment represented a place of comfort, fear, but also limited view and limited thinking. For him, he only saw his problems in the tent. He only saw in that perspective there. And the truth for many of us is we aren't lacking miracles. We're just living in the tent. We're just living in the tents of our lives and missing out on the greatness of who God is on the outside of the tent when we look up and we see the stars. I love what Psalms 121 says. Verse 1 and 2. It says, "Look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. That we would look up to the Lord. We would see where our help comes from, and we would look to that in those moments. I love what Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 26. It says this. It says, look up to the heavens. Who created all the stars? He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling them each by name. Because of his great power and his incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. That is the power of our God. That is the greatness of who he is in all of his strength and all of his majesty. That we would look up and we would understand that God even calls the stars out and names them, every one of them by name. The ones that we can't even fully count, that he called Abram to go out and look up to the stars and promise that his descendants would be as far as every star, far more, and would be greater. I want you to get a bigger perspective, a greater view of who God is. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, reminds us of this. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Is that God, in the reality of this, is that God is always working. God is always moving. That all we have to do is look outside. Look up at the stars. Look out at the horizon and see the goodness of God. That the heavens declare the glory of God. That we'd be reminded every day that he calls the stars out by name, not missing one. God cares about the intricate details of everything, including our lives. So this moment that you may find yourself and wonder, is God still doing miracles? I believe he is, if we'll just notice and maybe change our perspective. So what do we do at this moment? What do we do in this time, in this season for us? I want to give you a few practical things to do, maybe this week, tonight, maybe even before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning. The first thing is that you would just step outside of your tent. Where's that place that you found comfort to try to draw away from the fear or the stress of life? What has your attention more than God? Has fear overtaken you? Has stress overtaken you? Has disappointment been the thing that controls your life? What tent have you holed yourself up in? Step outside of your tent. The second thing is, I would encourage you with, is practice looking up. Start noticing the things that God is doing. Right now, let's just do this. We'll practice noticing. Let's just all take a deep breath. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. And let it out. The fact that we have breath and can breathe even in this moment is a miracle from God. Those moments when we breathe, breath, the provision that we have for life. And granted, I don't know who all's in this room. I don't know what your financial situation. But the way God has provided is a gift from Him. The relationships even that you have in your life, do you ever stop and consider how blessed you are for the people that you have in your life? I thank the Lord for many of you every day. That we would thank the Lord for all of the people that God has placed around us. And then as well to look around at all the things that God is doing. The fact that He can take a small little seed and create a massive tree out of His goodness. That He would hold us on this planet. Let us not take for granted the breath that we have, or even the medicine that God has given us, or everything that we need. They're everyday miracles that are all around us. A third thing I would encourage you with is to do this, just to magnify God daily. My challenge for you this week is maybe you would just say these simple words every day for the next week. God, show me what I've been missing. God, show me what I've been missing around me. Show me where you're at work around me. Because that may be the greatest perspective change for you. That you would begin to notice the things that He's doing at work. Whether you're on the phone, you're on a computer, using your hands, that you would notice the things around you of where God is moving and what He is doing. Because for many of us, we don't need a new miracle. We need a new perspective. We don't need another miracle or some big thing. We need a new perspective of our situation. Because if God opened all of our eyes today, I believe we would realize that He's been working this whole time. So right now, for you and for me, what has your attention more than God? What has your attention more than God? Is it fear or anxiety or maybe disappointment or the continued waiting? I want to encourage you to release that today. To step out of the tent and look up again. To look up at the things that God is doing. And you would allow God to give you a better perspective of who He is.